it's going to be examined and scrutinised, as it were. Mr. Hooper has indeed asked a number of questions based on, I think, something that's happened in his constituency. I would point out that before I took over, enforcement was a very meagre resourced and pursued part of planning. We have beefed up the enforcement team. We've now got 2.5 people working on enforcement. We've also introduced a policy because previously there was no real direction and there was no expectation of anything happening because there was no policy, operational policy behind it. Now, Mr. Hooper has criticised our operational policy, but as I see it, we have a fairly good story to tell. People now know what to expect when they make a complaint. There is a proper procedure to follow, and all right, we triage the complaints because a lot of them turn out to be very minor or neighbourhood disputes, and some people haven't made any breaches of planning at all. So it's a robust process, but it does weed out a lot of enforcement issues that are perhaps not enforcement issues or that can be dealt with without taking formal enforcement action.
But at the middle or higher end, it's enforcing the law, isn't it, in effect?
It is, but it has to be proportional. It's a bit like the police, and it's the analogy I've used in the past. The police don't prosecute every crime that they come across. They have to look at the circumstances and whether it's right and proportional to prosecute. And that happens in a lot of spheres of life. And enforcement is the same.
They've got fixed notice penalties and everything else, though, as well in the armoury, haven't they?
Yes, but they don't always use those. And it's a matter, and I use that word proportionality time and time again when I've answered questions in the keys. I quite welcome the scrutiny because I think the story we have is a good story. We've moved forward a lot when I look at what happened in the previous administration, and I'm quite proud of the team. They are now taking enforcement by the scruff of the neck and dealing with it. I don't think we're ever going to please all of the people all of the time. Planning is one of those things where whichever way a decision is made, and that applies to enforcement as well as the primary planning process, there are always going to be winners and losers. And sadly, the losers sometimes think that they have been wronged, and they have an appeal process, and in an enforcement sense, they can come back, and we look at things very objectively.
Well, we just had the interested party status, haven't we? Changes to the regulations there, and a bit of an outcry from those in the Glenvine area and Crosby area over the planning dispute there. That's in mid-session, and they've lost that status.
Well, they haven't really. They had interested party status on the majority of the applications. The houses are being built now. As I understand it, and I'm not involved in everyday planning, but this was a separate application that dealt with some drainage aspects of the site. And we've obviously instigated the policy, and the policy actually applies when a decision is made, because that's when people are either granted interested party status or not. So there has to be a cut-off point. They had their opportunity with the previous applications, which are now settled. Of course, everyone has the right to put in objections to any planning application during the planning process. The interested party status then kicks in at the decision point, and I'm not saying it's necessarily been badly abused, but there have been concerns that people were getting interested party status when they had no interest in the site or no connection that was obvious to people. And my department and Cabinet Office have been tasked to streamline the planning process and make it more efficient. And this is part of that. Now, you have to draw a line in the sand somewhere with applications, and this one fell over that transition period.